Then let's get started. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all. Thank you for joining us today for this public discussion session to present the IIS application papers on recovery and resolution. My name is Ayana Ishii. I'm a policy advisor with the IIS Secretariat. I'm pleased to be joined today by Alex Hart, Chair of the IIS Resolution Working Group, and Hanne van Houten, Head of Supervisory Practices and Operations with the IIS Secretariat. This webinar is being recorded, including any questions or comments made by participants during the session, and we will publish the recording on the IIS public website in the coming days. These presentation slides are already available on our public website. I will also share the link to the slides in the chat box shortly after this introduction for your convenience. Now, let me briefly walk you through the agenda for this webinar. First, we will provide some background information related to the application papers. Secondly, we will present an overview of the application papers, including a summary of the consultation feedback and the updates made to the papers. And third, we will have a Q&A session to answer your question. During the Q&A session, we will invite you to raise your virtual hand, and then we will unmute you one by one to ask your question. You can also use the chat box if you prefer to put your question in writing. With that, I will now hand it over to Alex Hart for the presentation. Alex, over to you.
Thanks, Ayana. And again, just to repeat, welcome to everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you so much for taking time to join us so that we can explain to you the long, hard work we did on revising the application papers on recovery and resolution, which I think now you will find to be very helpful guides to the revisions that were made to the ICPs and ComFrame in 2024. So let me start with the background. As I think most of you know, the insurance core principles form the globally accepted framework for insurance supervision. They seek to encourage the maintenance of consistently high supervisory standards for insurance supervision. And the Common Framework for Supervision of Internationally Active Insurance Groups, or ComFrame for short, builds on those ICPs and establishes supervisory standards that focus on effective supervision of IAIGs. Note that the proportionality principle applies equally to the ComFrame and ICPs throughout and to all of them, allowing supervisors to tailor their requirements to the size, complexity, and risk profile of insurers. The ICPs in ComFrame were last updated in December of 2024, including the resolution and recovery related standards and guidance in ICPs 12, 16.15, and the related ComFrame materials. Next slide, please. So to remind you too, application papers provide supporting material related to the specific supervisory material, i.e. the ICPs and ComFrame. These aid IAIS members in putting the ICPs and ComFrame into practice. Application papers do not establish nor provide new requirements, but rather enhance the understanding of the ICPs through advice, illustrations, recommendations, and examples of good practice on how you may want to implement. Similar to the ICPs in ComFrame, the proportionality principle also applies to the content of all application papers. Next, please. So the overview. After the adoption of the updated ICPs in ComFrame 12 and 16.15 in the end of 2024, the IAIS reviewed and updated the existing application papers on recovery and resolution in order to give further guidance on those updated ICPs and ComFrame standards, to provide insights into more recent practices and examples as the existing application papers were drafted in like 2019 and 2021, and relied on surveys from membership that obviously were old data. So we wanted to be able to update that. Um, the public consultation on the revised APs was conducted between November of last year and February of this year. And the final versions of the application papers reflecting the feedback from that public consultation were published in July of 2026. There are links in the PowerPoint deck to those papers. Okay, next slide, please. Topics that we covered in the resolution paper. First of all, we talked about objectives and concepts of resolution, including insurance-related considerations, descriptions of the NCWOL, no creditor worse off than in liquidation principle. We talked about concepts and examples of conditions for entry into resolution, and provided descriptions and practical application suggestions for resolution powers. We walked through concepts and key aspects of preparation for resolution, provided objectives and key elements for a resolution plan, including a process for determining the need for a resolution plan, um, which was one of the major revisions in the ICPs. We also went through key elements of a resolvability assessment and resolving identified impediments. And last, cooperation and coordination among involved authorities, both in normal and in crisis times. Next slide, please. With respect to the recovery planning paper, we went through a similar kind of outline, starting with objectives and concepts of recovery planning, including the relationship with other ERM tools such as ORSA or contingency plans. We talked about the scope of application and proportionality of the requirement for a recovery plan, which was also some of the material that was modified in ICP 16.15 in 2024. We went through governance related matters in recovery planning, including the development and approval process for a recovery plan and the relevant overall risk management of an insurer. We talked through key elements of a recovery plan and examples of applications. And last, the role of supervisors in recovery planning, including the assessment of the recovery plans and supervisory cooperation and coordination. Sorry about that. Next slide, please. So in the public consultation that was conducted back in the winter, we received a total of 337 comments, 196 on resolution and 141 on recovery from 27 different respondents that were broad-based and included insurance trade associations, global organizations and industry forums, insurance groups themselves, policyholder protection schemes, and IAIS member supervisors. Next slide, please. So for a summary of the consultation comments, I think at the top line there was support for an emphasis on proportionality, while at the same time maintaining flexible risk-based frameworks, and avoid overly prescriptive approaches, with an eye towards easing the burden on smaller and non-systemic insurers. The way we went about trying to address that was to hopefully provide what are clearer definitions, um, clearer guidance, and more to the point examples that hopefully will avoid misinterpretations, and allow better understanding and practical implementation. Um, we also were hopeful that we'd make them easier to assess, such that there would be, less guesswork on the part of supervisors with respect to how to apply these things, and less guesswork on the part of assessors in terms of what's the intent. Um, so we've particularly more clearly defined the roles and responsibilities of all parties involved: insurers, supervisors, and resolution authorities. Um, we delved into reinsurance related matters and talked about resolution planning items that apply to assuming reinsurers, to seeding insurers, or to both. And we've tried to provide clear guidance on the impact of asset intensive insurance, or AIR, or funded re in some jurisdictions. Um, in the recovery area, we've proposed leveraging existing frameworks, as I mentioned before, existing ERM and ORSA for recovery planning, to help minimize duplication and streamline processes. We wanted to highlight the significance of operational preparedness, and ensuring that recovery plans are practical and actually usable in a crisis. We don't want to imply that a recovery plan just needs to check all the boxes and be some long formal document, but rather it needs to serve its purpose and be a helpful tool if an insurer gets into trouble. Um, to help do that, we've encouraged the adoption of simplified recovery plans, and phased implementation for smaller, less complex insurers, to again reduce unnecessary burden, but also help make sure that the document itself is usable and useful. Next slide, please. So several updates were made throughout both of the papers, again with an eye towards enhancing clarification and additional guidance. The most significant updates were made to Section 2.4 in the resolution paper, about considerations related to reinsurance, including AIR. Overall, the changes that were made hopefully enhance the practical usability of the papers and improve their clarity. For an example, the updates clarify which elements are relevant to seeding insurers versus reinsurers. We added references to the relevant ICPs that also touch on reinsurance, to provide additional guidance on considerations related to it. The AIR text was moved from the main text of the paper into a new box topic, to clarify that it is more of an example rather than, at this point, a formal recommendation of good practice. And you'll note too that there are other IAIS working groups that are currently engaged in more detailed work on AIR, and we are open and willing to collaborate with them, and we've chatted about the topic before. So next slide, please. That's the end of my formal prepared remarks. I'll certainly open the floor to any questions or comments y'all might have, and ask Ayana to moderate them.
Thank you very much, Alex. So now we are happy to invite any question from participants. So if you have a question, you can raise your virtual hand, then we will unmute you to ask you a question. So you can also use the chat box if you prefer to put your question in writing. Okay, now I now see Angus Cozy has raised a hand.
Okay.
Hi there. Hi there. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Well, first of all, thanks. I'm Angus Scorgie. I represent the GIFIA, the Global Federation of Insurance Associations, and specifically the Systemic Risk Working Group. So, first of all, thanks for your presentation and for your work on this. I was wondering, what I would really like to know is there any sort of follow-up work planned within the IAIS following the updates to these application papers with regard to recovery and resolution, or have you now concluded your work on recovery and resolution and we can all, sit back, I guess, and relax, or what's the next steps maybe? Thanks.
Well, I'll take the first high level stab at that and then let my secretariat colleagues follow in with any details. But thank you for the kind words, Angus, and the recognition of the effort that went into these papers. Um, Going forward, I mean, our work is never done, right? I mean, there's constantly evolving environment and constantly evolving supervisory practices and insurer practices that need to be addressed. And we will, of course, periodically evaluate where those things are. As you asked the question, we're beginning to have some dialogue internally about the roadmap going forward. One of the things we've thought about is potentially digging a little deeper into the reinsurance aspects of resolution. Um, but we'll see how that fits in with the remainder of the IAIS work plan. Um, Hannah, Ayana, anything you want to add?
Thank you, Alex. No, not necessarily anything to add. Indeed, this is exactly the time where we are considering any future work. But I can say that we're not planning to create new standards or revising our ICPs or COMPRIME anytime soon. And perhaps also an invitation to all of you if there are certain aspects of this topic that the US industry or other interested parties feel like the IS could add further value. We would also always be happy to hear that.
So now we have received a question in the chat box from Bernardo Lee. Does the IIS view the risks related to AIR as now becoming more moderated versus, say, previous years? It increases confidence on capital arrangement in third countries. Alex?
Okay, Bernard, thank you for your question. But unfortunately, I'm going to duck it a little bit in that, I think that's more the province of the MSWG, who is currently engaged in working on an application paper on AIR. I would say, from the resolution point of view, we thought that it was important to at least acknowledge and address that there are specific and special considerations in AIR transactions, as there are in reinsurance transactions more broadly, that need a little bit of a different approach or a different thought process in the resolution process. So I would say from our point of view, with respect to AIR, it's still something that we're trying to really get our hands around. So it's a bit premature to try to give you an answer to your question from our point of view.
We now have another question. We have received another question in the chat box from Junichi Tominaga. Thank you for this webinar. Did the FSB provide any comments on the revision to the application paper or on the IIS work relating to recovery planning and resolution planning?
Good question. And, I don't recall, and Ayana can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't recall that FSB necessarily provided written comments in the consultation, but we have a long history of working with the FSB through its cross-border crisis management group for insurers and the resolution steering group on collaboration and cooperation on resolution matters on insurance. They have been a part of the conversation with us and we with them. So, in that regard, there's a constant presence of the FSB backdrop in what we do in terms of the key attributes. That's something that we always have kept in mind with respect to drafting the ICPs and the ComFrame, and try to explain in the application papers also in a context of the key attributes. So, FSB has had opportunity to review our work both at the ICP level and at the application paper level.
So now we have received another question in the chat box too. How does from the Monica Postel, I hope I pronounce your name correctly. So how does the IIS envisage effective cross-border recognition of group recovery and resolution planning, particularly where subsidiaries are subject to different national planning requirements?
Thanks, Monica. Another good question. And the papers address this to some degree. We talk about cross-border issues. We talk about supervisory cooperation and coordination, which is a very important element of resolution planning or recovery planning, for that matter. So I think we've said that that's paramount. You've got to have cooperation in the case of an IAIG or a systemic insurer through a crisis management group that looks at these kinds of things on a cross-border basis. But moreover, in the case of a non-IAIG where there's cross-border business, I think the papers have done a pretty good job of, again, emphasizing the need for supervisory coordination ahead of anything going south. So that, I mean, one of the things I know we do here in the US is have meetings that just so you know who to call at the right place, the right time. So I think it's important that even at that level on a business as usual basis, there needs to be constant communication so that you know who to call when something's starting to go wrong in your subsidiary, and you want to make sure that the host jurisdictions and the home jurisdictions know what's going on. And I think some of that material Hannah just posted in the chat. So there's your more formal answer rather than my ramblings.
Yes, I would add that the ICP has the formal kind of requirements and good practices in place, and Alex is adding the flavor of how does it actually work in practice, because having it in writing is of course only one thing, but in the end it's about the the actual communication amongst different supervisors and then resolution authorities that make this happen, that it's consistent across the different jurisdictions.
Any additional questions?
I don't see any hands raised or question in the chat box.
So I
Yeah.
guess, ladies, we've either stunned them or stumped them. So
So, yeah, Alex, do you have any final remarks before we close the webinar?
no, I just would like to have everybody recognize that revising the ICPs largely to reflect the lessons learned in the TJAs, and revising the application papers then to expound on those revisions was really a tremendous amount of work for the resolution working group. And I am very proud of the work that was done by everybody. I mean, this was a true full team effort. And just, if you know anybody that's a part of the working group, tell them thanks.
Thank you very much, Alex, for your wonderful final remarks and for all your leadership to accomplish this project. So once again, thank you to everyone for joining us today. We hope today's webinar was informative and helpful. So thank you very much and have a good day, everyone.